All right, moving on. Now, for cryptocurrencies to have any chance of knocking cash off its perch, they need to at least be able to carry out lots of transactions simultaneously and have rock bottom processing fees. If they can do the former, they can scale. If they can do the latter, then micropayments can flourish, which helpfully enough is the title of our next block. It's on scalability and and micropayments. The first of our 4 speakers, if my voice will hold up, is Dr. Arthur Gervais. He is the CEO, CEO of Liquidity. Arthur.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. What happened 2040 before Christ? Wild guess. It was the first instance of centralized banking. So what we have seen here is a balance sheet. It was in Mesopotamia. Basically, it tells you how much funds a particular person owns. And it's centralized because it's in one single place, controlled by one entity. And I agree, much time has passed since then. This custodian-based finance intermediary business really flourished. So we have seen banks and services being built around this all over the world. And even more with the invention of the Turing machine by Alan Turing in 1936, the internet and the computer revolution actually also revolutionized the financial intermediaries that are custodian-based, so that you have point of sales at every shop, etc. Interestingly, we have seen the invention of privacy-preserving banking, which still is centralized, with, for example, inventions such as eCash by David Chaum. And we can see that these payment systems have been really scalable. So they have been used by millions and millions of users and have helped a lot of businesses to a lot of user adoption. Almost 10 years ago now, so in October, on the 31st of October, it will be 10 years, was Bitcoin invented by Satoshi Nakamoto. And this is the first instance of non-custodian-based financial intermediaries. So non-custodian means that the user, so the one that is actually doing a transaction on behalf of his own funds, remains the owner of his own funds. Right? So so the user, in a sense, remains custodian. And the issue with these open and decentralized blockchains that we have seen is that they do not really scale. So the reason is basically that the number of processing capacity of current blockchains is just very low. It's because there's no single entity that allows you to control the network or the ledger. So the number of unconfirmed transactions or the number of transactions that are floating around in the network is just can be immense. So the settlement capacity is very low, which is reflected in the unpredictable transaction prices that you can find on open and decentralized ledgers such as Bitcoin or Ethereum. So they have hit on average rates beyond $50. Luckily, it's going down since then. But if they go down, this doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. It could just mean that, well, there might be less users actually using the system, and this is not what we want, right? We want mainstream adoption. So my question would be, is there maybe the possibility of a new market segment for banks and exchanges? So if you look at the current existing services of finance intermediaries, well, these are custodian and they perform transfers and exchanges in the capacity of a custodian. Now, they have regulatory certainty because they're acting in a framework that has been well established over many years. But maybe these finance intermediaries can now add a new type of service to their existing portfolio of systems to address a new market segment, which would be still transfers and exchanges of currency or payments, however, in the capacity of a non-custodial finance intermediary. Okay. So what's interesting, I believe, is that on the regulation side, there might be simplifications. There might be. It's not yet sure. Everybody knows we are in a rather uncertain regulatory environment in the blockchain space. But I know, at least from a few countries, that if you're not a custodian, then this simplifies your requirements regarding banking license, regarding KYC, regarding AML. So how would this look? What is the requirement to have a blockchain-based, non-custodial finance intermediary? So I believe one of the first priorities is user onboarding. So a user should not be encumbered with, for example, purchasing crypto or having to deal with complicated private keys. So it needs to be easy, and it should be like, if you install your app, you're basically already in the network, right? So this should be as easy as possible. It needs to scale to millions of users, millions of transactions. And more importantly, a merchant would need to be able to sign, you would need to get a service level agreement. So for example, if I'm a merchant, I want to be able to get a guarantee that I can get at least 100 transactions per second from my customers. Right? Amazon would never use the blockchain if they can't get like thousands of transactions per second as a merchant. Right? So service level agreements, or to professionalize the blockchain space, I believe is very, very important in order for the blockchain space to be used by more and more businesses worldwide. So how to achieve these properties? Well, obviously, we need to solve scaling, right? And there are different avenues, and there are many excellent teams working on different directions, notably on the consensus layer, basically changing, for example, the longest blockchain rule to a graph, or on the sharding side, so partitioning the network into smaller shards and having like reaching consensus within a shard, which would be faster, or doing off-chain transactions. So which one to choose? Well, maybe you can actually work on all these levels together. They're actually complementary. That's the good thing. So we are working, Liquidity is working on the off-chain layer. The main reason being that you can actually compare off-chain to a cache. If you're having a computer architecture, are you writing to disk every time that you modify that you do something on your PC? No. You have like random access memory, you have caches on your PC, and these are much faster than the underlying hard disk that you go back to for persistency, right? So you can see there's an analogy between off-chain and the blockchain. While off-chain is, you can think of it as kind of a cache. So it's much faster and allows you really, basically the number of transactions that you can get, this is simply limited by your internet connectivity between the peers. While on the consensus layer and sharding layer, there are a lot of efforts going on, but we are focusing on off-chain at the current moment. And if you're looking at off-chain, I have to specify we're looking at off-chain payments. There are off-chain state channels as well. So a state channel is something that stores a state of a computer program, while payments are really focused and optimized for the purpose of performing payments or exchanges. And I believe you can get for purpose-specific solutions are always more efficient than generic solutions, right? For example, the Ethereum blockchain grows much faster than the Bitcoin blockchain. Why is that? Well, smart contracts are much bigger than regular transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? I believe the current Ethereum blockchain is about beyond 60. It's beyond. It's about 6 times bigger than the Bitcoin blockchain. I'm not, roughly. And Bitcoin has been around for more than 5 years than Ethereum. So if you're looking at different off-chain scaling solutions, you can see two-party payment channels, which is something that has been pushed mainly by Lightning, and this is a great way on how to potentially scale Bitcoin. And there are different solutions. You can have unidirectional payment channels, so you pay in one direction. You can have bidirectional payment channels, you pay in 2 directions. Linked payments, so if you want to pay over a hop to someone, or you could think of building payment channel hubs. So basically one node or several nodes that have a star topology, so these nodes are very well connected within the system. A new class of off-chain payment scaling solutions would be n-party payment hubs. And this is what Liquidity is fundamentally building. This is the technology that we are providing. So let me go a bit into details about what is a payment channel. So a payment channel is an agreement between 2 parties. It can be a bidirectional channel if both parties deposit, for example, 1 Ether. And they can do then payments in both directions, up to 1 Ether. This channel establishment here that you see is on the chain. So this is not an off-chain transaction. You can think of it like you charge a prepaid card, right? and then you can use your amount up to the maximum amount that you have on your prepaid card. So let's say you send 001 Ether in one direction. What you need to do at this very moment is to update the off-chain balance, which you can see here. If you do another payment in the other direction, you will need to invalidate the former state and basically create a new off-chain state. So at the very moment that you want to close this particular channel, you would need to settle the latest state. Right? You need to invalidate all former states, and it's actually important that you remain online to verify that your counterparty is not cheating, that it's not like submitting an old state. In that case, you can close the channel, and then you're done. Right? So there are a few challenges that you can see that payment channels have. So one particular is it's nice to have a payment between two parties, and for payments between two parties, I think payment channels are a great solution. If you, however, want to reach more than two people, like more than one person, more than one counterparty, you would need to find kind of a route to a particular peer. So let's say we have this topology, right? There are 3 channels so far. The middle channel is almost depleted, so there are very little funds in there. So what can you do? Well, you need to find another route, right? So let's say there's another peer, and these are connected as such. So then you can route a payment here across this path and reach the final node. The more intermediate hops you have, the higher the likelihood that your connection or your payment is going to fail, because these are not professional entities. It's a peer-to-peer network. There's a lot of churn. Peers are leaving, peers are joining. They don't sign an SLA with you, a service level agreement, right? The collateral that they have, it might be empty, it might not be sufficient. So there's a lot of dynamic adjustment that needs to be done, and it's expensive. And moreover, those peers, they are maybe nice to you, but they won't do the service for free, so they want a cut. So there will be a transaction fee for every hop that you're hopping about. Another issue is that if you look at the collateral required to build, for example, a hub system with two-party payment channel technology, you would look at how much collateral does this central node needs to set up. So let's say we have 4 peers, and we estimate an average transaction volume of like 1 Ether to each peer. Well, in this case, it might be 4 Ether, which could be bearable by this particular instance. But what about if we have 1 million peers? So if you're a hub and you actually want to scale mainstream, well, then we need at least 1 million payment channels here. For 1 million payment channels, we need 1 million on-chain transactions. That in itself is already quite a huge requirement. But not only that, for 1 million peers and let's say an average transaction amount of $10,000 to each peer, we would need $10 billion of lockup for this particular requirement. And that's a lot of money that you need to lock up in a hot wallet on the blockchain, right? So each of these are tied to a particular peer, each of these channels. So you can't kind of use the collateral at another peer. So in order to alleviate some of those problems, Liquidity proposed Revive. Revive is a technology in order to make two-party payment channels more scalable. And it relies on the idea that if you have a cycle in your graph of your payment channels, and let's say we have the current setting here, so you have like 1 Ether, let's say we are the leftmost node, you have 1 Ether deposit there, and there's a 0 Ether deposit to the peer that you actually want to send something to. So you could go over the expensive route, expensive because the intermediate peer will take a transaction toll, or you could run Revive. You could revive the channel that is currently depleted. So you make a Revive instance, you use some of your collateral on the other channel, and then you go the cheaper route. Okay. So that's a very simple example. It can get much more complex within more complex topologies. So that's peer-reviewed academic work that was published last year, and the source is open on GitHub. Liquidity is an extension of Revive. So in Liquidity we build efficient off-chain payment hubs, and we believe these are capable of offering professional financial intermediary services while not being a custodian. right? So not being a custodian means that we would need to rely on an open and decentralized blockchain, because otherwise, if the blockchain is owned by an entity, in the end, it's custodian. And the first feature that I would like to show you is the user onboarding that we can do in Liquidity right now already. It's the so-called off-chain registration. So with just having a signed TCP message, you can join the network. So you basically have your private key of your standard, for example, Ethereum client. You sign a message, I would like to join Liquidity, and you send this to the payment hub. And at this very moment, this is free, at this very moment, you can receive an off-chain transfer from another peer. So note, you cannot send funds without depositing them. So if you register and you have 0 funds, you cannot send anything, which is standard. However, you can receive already off-chain funds from someone. So let's say I'm installing my Liquidity app, and now my friend has Liquidity, and he has some off-chain, or so we call it liquid ether. Then I give him $5, and he sends me $5 worth of ether to my phone. Or it could be $5 of stablecoin, right? We will support ERC20 tokens. So the user onboarding as such is really easy because the user is not encumbered with any on-chain ether per se or on-chain tokens, right? So you can really stay within this environment of off-chain, and only if you really want to, you can withdraw from the off-chain world and go back to the on-chain world, and then, for example, go to an exchange and cash out. So after this off-chain registration, you receive some off-chain transfer and you forward it to a peer. So what are the implications of having a non-custodial finance intermediary that performs transaction execution and also allows exchange operations? So if you look a bit at the history of exchanges, you can see that in some ancient times, or nowadays even, if you go to some marketplace, you're always custodian of your own funds, right? But the number of transactions that you're doing is not very high. So the stock exchange basically is an exchange where you're operating with a custodian, so you're operating with a bank, and it allows you to have quite a high volume. But even in the stock exchange, the settlement is typically done always at the end of the day, right? So if you're looking at centralized exchanges, such as Kraken, Binance, you can see that these are custodians, right? You have a high volume of transactions, you have fast trading, but you don't own the funds as a user, right? You're working with a custodian. You're not custodian of your own funds. And here's the beauty about decentralized exchanges. They have brought back the control of the funds to the users, and there are many excellent teams working on really great DEXs nowadays. The only issue that we see with current DEXs is that they won't scale because they're just relying on the underlying blockchain for the transaction swap. Okay? An order book might be off the chain, but where the transaction swap is actually happening, it's again on the chain, which limits you to the current limitations of open decentralized blockchains. So in Liquidity, as it's a non-custodial finance intermediary that allows both the transmission of crypto assets as well as the swap of crypto assets, we can perform a so-called decentralized exchange, which is off the chain, completely off the chain. This means the order book can be off the chain as well as the transaction swap can be off the chain. And I believe such an exchange could reach the speeds of centralized exchanges, of custodian exchanges. So in addition to the off-chain transfer, we have the off-chain swap in Liquidity. So Liquidity is implemented and operational on the Ethereum testnet since March 2018, so this year. You can try it on your own browser, you just need MetaMask. So basically you can deposit, you can open a connection, so you have off-chain registration, then you deposit some amount of funds on one instance, and then you can transfer it to another instance that also did an off-chain registration, and then just forward it to more peers. So it's fully working on the Ethereum testnet. So to finalize the presentation, I would just like to iterate that we have a simple, free, and user onboarding process. So it's off-chain registration. We can scale to millions of users, and we're currently working to get the mainnet ready. along with mobile apps so that people can join there. And we're planning on issuing service level agreements as soon as the software is more reliable. There will be additional scientific papers that will be added to explain how the liquidity network works, as well as the accompanying source code that will be released once it's ready, so that other people can also run payment hubs. And we really envision a network where there are multiple entities that can operate payment hubs and connect together. Right? So we see it as a blockchain on top of another blockchain. Thank you very much.